Hi, this is Chris, owner of Highline Handmade Guitars. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the following slideshow which depicts the construction of one of my guitars. I started this project by drawing up the design in CAD software. This will help me to avoid problems later on during the construction process. Construction begins with the neck. I selected a nice piece of quarter sawn mahogany. A scarf joint is cut on the bandsaw. The angled surfaces are then planed smooth on a joiner. The headstock portion is trimmed close to final thickness. A pair of wood screws will keep the two pieces from slipping during glue-up. Several pieces of mahogany are stacked up to make the heel. Once the glue had dried, I routed a slot for a double-action truss rod. Then it was off to the bandsaw to rough cut the basic shape. My favorite way to shape a neck is to use Japanese Iwasaka files. These files are fast and really accurate. These files do such a great job, I think it's time to retire the old spoke shave. I spent a lot of time shaping the heel tenon with chisels. I had some scrap rosewood left over from the backs which I used to make the headstock plate. The fretboard was fashioned from Bolivian rosewood and bound with flamed maple. You have to be very precise when routing the channels for the binding. If you make a mistake, it's very difficult to fix it. With the neck basically finished, I focused my attention on gluing up the spruce soundboard. After the glue had dried, I cut out the basic shape and started working on inlaying the custom-made rosette. The braces for both the soundboard and the back were cut from quarter sawn spruce and then rough shaped prior to glue up. The braces were pre-radiused to give the top a 28-foot radius and the back a 20-foot radius. It really isn't necessary to use expensive clamps or fancy jigs to glue the braces into place. All I had to do was place the plate into the appropriate radius dish and then use weights to hold the braces while the glue dried. It saves time to pre-carve the braces with a bandsaw prior to glue up. My goal when shaping the braces is to reduce as much mass as possible while producing an excellent tap tone. Before I could start bending the sides, I had to make a form out of MDF. It's a simple form, but it does the trick. I call this my ghetto bending iron. It's just a heat gun with a steel tube attached to the end. To my surprise, this bending iron worked pretty good. I fabricated my own neck and tail blocks, which were then glued to the sides. The two sides were then joined together in the form. I forgot to shoot a photo showing where I glued in the kerfing strip, but I used the normal method with a bunch of clamps. Then I sanded that top edge where the soundboard meets the sides in a radius sanding dish. Then I glued on the top and clamped it all down with some old bicycle inner tubes. I gotta say, it's looking pretty good so far. After trimming the sides, I glued in the kerfing strips. The back edge was then sanded in the 20-foot radius sanding dish. The back was then glued and tightly clamped into place. This weird-looking jig will be used to route the mortise for the neck tenon. Yeah, I know it looks pretty scary, but it worked great. See what I mean? Then it was back to the neck to glue on the fretboard. A quick check fit indicates the neck will fit tight as a tiger. After installing the frets, I started to apply the finish. I'm using a water-based amber shellac. The heel cap is just a piece of scrap rosewood. While the shellac dried, I began fabricating the bridge. Wow, did I really make that? For me, the scariest part of this whole build was routing the channels for the binding in the body. If the channels aren't cut precisely, or if you slip with the router, it's game over. The binding and purfling were then glued into place. Using flame maple to bind a guitar is a challenge, but the results are well worth it. Both the neck and the body received a couple of coats of amber shellac, which was then sanded smooth and then top coated with a clear water-based polyurethane. The neck and body were then sanded to 4000 grit. A trip to the buffing machine brought out a mirror-like shine. This is what the neck looked like before level sand. And this is how it looked after buffing. Pretty nice. The bridge was then glued into place, and the holes for the end pins were reamed with my $3 reamer. After attaching the neck to the body, I installed the tuners. The frets were then leveled and recrowned, polished with some steel wool, and buffed to a mirror-like shine. All that was left to do was make a nut, string it up, and set the action. And here's the final result. I have to say, building an acoustic guitar was not as difficult as I thought it was going to be. It just takes some careful planning and an understanding of all the processes that are going to be involved. You don't want to start this without really knowing what you're doing. Otherwise, you're going to be surprised at some point by a process that doesn't go exactly as planned. So if you really think it through from start to finish, it isn't that difficult to build an acoustic guitar. And I'm pretty happy with the way this one turned out. I'm going to give it to my son, and I think he'll be delighted.
Cool. That'll work.